My name is Daniel Mercer. I drove a school bus in Washington County, Maine, for just under 16 years, and most of that time my route started before sunrise and ended after the roads had gone dark again in winter. People hear that and picture something simple. They picture a yellow bus, a thermos of coffee, a few sleepy kids, and a man making wide turns through small towns. That is not what the job is. What you are really doing, if you do it long enough, is carrying 40 or 50 lives over black ice, washed-out shoulders, blind hills, moose crossings, logging traffic, frozen ruts, spring mud, and roads so narrow the spruce branches scrape both sides of the bus at once. You memorize every mailbox, every turnaround, every child who usually waves with the left hand because the right one is buried in a mitten. You notice when a porch light that is always on goes dark. You notice when a kid who talks too much gets quiet. You notice when the bus feels different under you, because on those roads, different can mean a patch of glare ice, a soft shoulder, a deer in the ditch, or something worse. I am telling you these stories because people outside places like that think fear comes from dramatic things. They think it announces itself. They think you hear a scream, or see a body, or get some big obvious warning that a normal morning has stopped being normal. That is not how it happened for me. For me, the fear came in slowly. It came through routine, through mileage that did not match, through children counted twice, through names on route sheets that should have been gone years before, through wet footprints on black-ribbed rubber that did not belong to anyone on the bus. And the worst part is that none of it started with a wreck, or a storm, or a stranger. It started with the kind of thing you could miss if you were tired. A child who may have gotten on the bus, or may not have. When I started driving, I was 32, divorced, broke in the steady, practical way grown men can be broke, and trying to keep a job that had health insurance and predictable hours in a county where predictable anything was getting harder to find. I had done maintenance work before that, then a couple years hauling feed and heating oil, but school transportation was steadier. My daughter, Leah, was 6 when I got hired. The district let drivers bring their own kids along if they were en route and old enough to sit right, and for a while, that mattered more to me than pride ever did. The older drivers used to say, "Every long route gets into your head eventually." I thought they meant boredom, repetition, the way the same miles can wear grooves in your thoughts. One driver in particular, a man named Earl Haskell, put it differently. Earl had white hair, a mechanic's hands, and a face that looked shaped by cold weather and bad coffee. He drove for years before a shoulder injury put him mostly in the garage, and he knew every retired route number the way some men know baseball stats. He did not waste words. The first winter I worked there, after I came in rattled from almost losing traction on a blind hill, he was leaning over an open engine hatch with a flashlight when he said, without looking at me, "You keep count out there?" I told him of course I did. He nodded like that was not what he meant. Then he wiped his hands and said, "Count the kids. Count the stops. Count the miles. If one of those changes, and you did not make it change, do not argue with yourself about it." I laughed a little, because I thought he was being one of those older guys who enjoy sounding mysterious around the new people. He looked up then, and there was nothing playful in his face at all. "Roads up here remember things," he said. "That is all." Which is probably why I let the first thing slide. If I had treated it seriously that first morning, maybe I could tell myself now that I did everything right. Instead, I told myself I must have remembered wrong. These are the stories I still cannot set aside. Case 1. Olivia Thibodeau. The first one happened in late November, the week after deer season opened, when the roads were lined with parked pickups before dawn, and half the fathers in the county smelled faintly like wet wool and gun oil. My route that year covered a long stretch outside Cherryfield and north toward a scatter of houses that never looked like a neighborhood unless you saw them on paper. Single-wide trailers with blue tarps on the roofs, old farmhouses sinking into themselves, capes with stacked firewood and rusted trampolines out back, a couple newer modular homes thrown up on cut lots. The Thibodeau kids were near the far end, down a spur off a county road where the pavement narrowed and the spruce closed in enough that even at sunrise it still looked like early night. There were two of them on my bus then. Evan, 3rd grade, all elbows and chatter, and his sister Olivia, 1st grade, small for her age, yellow knit hat with a pom-pom that made her easy to spot in snow. She was one of those quiet little kids who always held the handrail with both hands going up the steps, always sat in the same seat, and always said thank you when she got off, even if I was 3 feet away and the engine was loud enough to drown her out. On the Monday it happened. I remember the weather clearly because it was not dramatic. No storm, no heavy fog, just a raw morning around 34 degrees, mist hanging low in the ditches, enough wind to move the tops of the firs, but not enough to shake the bus. The kind of morning you do not file away because nothing about it seems important. I stopped at the Thibodeau turnout at 6:41. That part is fixed in my mind because I checked the dash clock after the stop. I was running maybe a minute early and considering whether to idle a little longer at the next pickup to even myself out. I opened the door, looked right, looked left, and saw one small shape come out of the dark from the direction of the house. Small enough to be Olivia, but kids in winter gear all look rounder and shorter than they are. I remember a backpack. I remember wet shoes on the bottom step. I remember the smell of damp wool when the door shut again. I also remember thinking, for no real reason, that it was odd Evan was not talking. Then I drove on. At 7:26, when I pulled into the elementary loop, one of the aides came out and asked if I had seen Olivia that morning. Her classroom had not marked her in yet. I said yes, I thought so. I still remember the way I said it. Not firmly, not the way I would have if someone had asked me whether I had fueled the bus or checked the rear emergency exit. I said it like a man reaching for a memory he assumed would settle if given a second. The aide asked where she had sat. I looked through the bus and could not answer. That by itself did not mean anything yet. Elementary kids shifted around. Sometimes they traded seats with cousins. Sometimes one moved if another had thrown up the day before, or spilled juice, or stepped in dog mess. But when I replayed the stop in my head, I could not picture her face. Only the shape, the backpack, the wet shoes. The school called home. No answer. Then they called the father's cell. He worked odd jobs and did not always pick up. He answered that time. Olivia had never left the house. They checked with Evan, and that was where the first cold feeling started to move through me. He said she had been awake, said she had had her coat on, said she was behind him on the walk to the road. But when I asked him myself, later that day with the principal standing nearby, he frowned hard and said, "I thought she got on." Thought. That word mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. By evening, the official line was that Olivia had likely wandered off before reaching the road. That made sense. It still does, if you lay it out cleanly. A 6-year-old in half-light, wet ground, woods close by, search conditions poor. There are cases like that every year somewhere. But the problem was me, because the more I went over the stop, the less certain I became that I had imagined it. I knew the feeling of the bus when a child steps on, not just visually, physically. There is a shift, a sound, the quick slap of a hand on vinyl, the squeak of a boot sole, the little hollow bounce in the front end as weight changes. I had felt that. I would have sworn to it in any other context. That night, I barely slept. Leah was at my sister's, and I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, thinking through everything in order. Door open, shape at the road, steps, smell of wet wool, door shut, drive on. At 4 the next morning I was back at the lot, and Earl took one look at me and asked which kid. I had not told him anything. I said, "Little girl from the Thibodeau route." He did not seem surprised, and that bothered me more than if he had. He came onto the bus with me before I left the yard and checked the front steps, then the aisle, then the rear emergency door. He ran one hand along the rubber seal and bent to inspect the handle, slow and careful. "What are you looking for?" I asked. He straightened up. "Anything out of place?" I remember getting angry then, not at him exactly, but at the way everyone had started acting, as if there was some hidden shape to the thing I was too dense to see. I told him there was no reason Olivia would have been at the back of the bus. If she had boarded, she would have sat near the front, like always. Earl just said maybe. I took the morning route because someone had to. In jobs like that, the world does not stop long enough for your nerves to catch up. Kids still need to get to school. Parents still stand at the end of frozen driveways with coffee cups steaming in their hands. If every driver stayed home after something bad, no district would run more than a week. The bus felt wrong from the minute I pulled out. Not dramatic, not haunted house wrong, just thin somehow, as if the heater could not keep up, though it was working fine. The windows fogged low near the floor. Twice I caught myself checking the overhead mirror because I thought someone had moved in the third row. When I reached the Thibodeau turnout, only Evan was there, with a deputy parked behind him and his father farther back by the trees, staring into the woods. Evan climbed on without a word and sat in Olivia's seat. I drove the rest of the route with my jaw locked so hard it hurt. Then, after the last child got off at school, and I walked the aisle for my mandatory child check, I found Olivia's mitten. It was caught in the rear emergency door handle, pinched up in the bracket the way fabric can get trapped if the handle is tested with something hanging loose nearby. Yellow wool, small, damp, but not fresh damp, colder than the rest of the bus. I stood there a long time looking at it. There are reasonable explanations. A kid could have found it on the road and played with it. Another child could have picked it up days earlier. It could even have been an older lost mitten of hers from some other week, though I had never seen her without the matched pair clipped to her coat. What I could not explain was what was on the glass beside it. A handprint, small, full, not smeared. 5 clear fingers in condensation on the inside of the rear door window. No other windows had fogged in that pattern, but for me, it did not close. A week later, on a morning with freezing drizzle, I passed the old turnoff just south of the Thibodeau stop and saw a yellow shape between the trees, level with the bus windows, not at child height but farther back, among the trunks where nobody should have been standing. I hit the brakes hard enough to wake 2 middle school boys asleep in the rear. There was nothing there when I got out, only wet brush and the smell of rot under the fir needles. When I came back onto the bus, Evan was staring at me from his seat. He looked past me toward the road and said, "Quiet as anything. She said you did not count." I asked him who said that. He shook his head and would not answer. That was the last full sentence he said to me for the rest of that school year. And when the transportation office later printed my mileage summary for the month, there was a 1/4 mile on the morning Olivia vanished that I could not account for. Not much, just enough to mean the bus had gone farther than the route required, or idled longer with the wheels moving, or made one stop I never wrote down. Case 2, the church turnoff. After Olivia, I started paying attention in a way I had not before. Not panicked, not superstitious, just careful. Careful with counts, careful with times, careful with the radio, especially the radio. I was coming down a straight stretch when the radio popped. Bus 12, take church turnoff detour, logging unit jackknifed ahead. That was the message. It sounded like dispatch, same clipped cadence, female voice, calm, exact. I reached for the mic and said copy. But before I keyed up, one of the boys in the first seat said, "Why did she call you Bus 12? I was driving Bus 21 that year." That alone should have made me ignore it, but there had been bus substitutions all week because of heater problems, and for half a second I thought maybe dispatch had just used my old route number by mistake. Then the voice came again. "Bus 12, confirm church turnoff." Same tone, same voice. Only flatter the second time, less breath in it. I did not answer. I slowed instead, because if there really was a logging truck blocking the main stretch, I needed time to decide before I got trapped with no turnaround. Those roads do not always give you room to reverse a full bus safely in ice. Church turnoff was narrow, but I knew I could get a bus through it if I had to. The boy up front, a sophomore named Nate, leaned toward the windshield and said, "There ain't no truck." He was right. I could see farther ahead than I had expected because the spruce opened for a bit, and there were no hazard lights, no blocked lane, no sign of anything. Then the static changed. There is a sound a radio makes when someone keys up from too far away, all hash and thin voice. This was not that. This was closer, wet-sounding, almost, as if the speaker had condensation in it. A new voice came through, or maybe not new. It sounded like the same dispatcher if you heard her from underwater. "Take the turnoff." One of the girls behind me made a soft noise and asked if we were rerouting. I said no. My own voice sounded normal, and that helped. I kept going straight. When I passed the mouth of church turnoff, every kid on the right side of the bus turned their heads at once. Not because I told them to, not because of a shout, because there were people standing there. 5 of them. At first, I thought it was a family whose car had gone off or broken down. They were lined up too neatly, just beyond the signpost, where a bus might stop if a route had ever gone that way. Small figures, 3 children and 2 maybe older, though in winter clothes it is hard to tell. No one waving, no one moving toward the road. Then we drew even with them and I saw the clothing. Not costumes, not old-fashioned in some theatrical way, just wrong. The coats were dark wool, shapeless and long, the kind you see in old-town photos hanging in school hallways. One of the girls had a lunch pail, actual metal, dull silver, no reflective gear, no bright backpack nylon, no knit hats with sports logos or cartoon patches, and all of them were dry. That was what snapped it fully into focus for me. The trees, the road, the sign, my side mirror, everything else shone with ice glaze. Freezing mist had been settling for an hour. My own bus windows were beaded. But those 5 figures looked untouched by weather. Matte, clean, as if they had been brought in from indoors and placed there. I drove past without opening the door. In the overhead mirror, I saw half the bus craned around to keep looking through the back windows. I told them all to sit forward. No one argued. The radio crackled again. This time it used my name. Daniel. Not Mr. Mercer. Not Bus 21. Just Daniel, in the dispatcher's voice. Then, "You missed them." The next safe turnaround was almost a mile ahead, at an old gravel pit access road. I took it, slow and wide. My plan was to loop back toward paved county road, skip the spur stops, and call the office once I got clear reception. But as I began the turn, Nate said, "There's one in the back." I looked in the mirror so fast I nearly climbed the shoulder. There was no one standing there, no visible extra person, just rows of seats, winter coats, pale faces, all turned toward me now instead of toward the windows. "Someone knocked," he said. I heard it then. 3 knocks from the rear emergency door. Not loud, not violent, just patient. I went back to the driver's seat and got us moving again. A lunch pail. Small, metal, old enough that the latch was the hook style instead of the newer clasp. No frost on it, though it had supposedly just ridden a January route in an underheated bus. When I opened it, there was nothing inside but a folded transfer slip, brittle at the edges, with the district name from before consolidation, and a student line filled out in fountain pen blue. No last name. Just Elsie. Route destination, church turnoff. Issue date, October 17th, 1968. I took it straight to Earl. When I asked who they were, he said, "Lost in transit." I thought that was just his phrase for dead children. I am not sure anymore, because 2 days later, while wiping down the inside windows before my afternoon run, I found wet handprints on the outside of the glass at seat height, all the way down the right side. 5 sets. As though children had been keeping pace with the bus for miles. Case 3. Troy Bennett. Troy was 8th grade, tall, stringy, baseball kid. Always smelled faintly like wood pellets because his family heated with one of those basement stoves that gets into your clothes. He rode one of the later secondary runs from a road near a culvert crossing locals called Bennett's Dip, not because it belonged to them, but because some relative had once rolled a truck there in the 70s, and the name stuck. In March, during that ugly stretch when winter is rotting but spring has not committed, Troy went missing after an away game. The school bus bringing the team back dropped him at the consolidated stop around 8:15 that night. 3 other kids saw him start down the side road toward home. He was carrying his duffel and wearing a school hoodie over practice gear. That was the last clean sighting. 3 days after he vanished, I found him. Or I found someone. It was just before 6, still dim, on the early elementary route. I came over the rise above Bennett's Dip and saw a figure in the road shoulder, walking toward the bus with that slow, loose movement people have when they are beyond tired. Bareheaded, no bag. Thin jacket soaked dark to the waist. I recognized the build before I recognized the face. I stopped, set the brake, and opened the door. "Troy?" He climbed on without speaking. The first thing I noticed was the cold that came in with him. Not outside cold, sharper than that, wet and cellar-like. He was shivering hard enough to rattle the handrail, but his skin had a strange flat color to it. Not blue exactly, just drained, like he had already spent all the blood needed for panic. There was mud on his cuffs, and one knee torn open. His feet were bare. I grabbed the bus blanket we kept behind the driver's seat and wrapped it around his shoulders while I called it in. A deputy and an ambulance got there in maybe 12 minutes. Troy let them help him off. He never resisted, never asked for his mother, never asked what day it was. He just kept turning his head slightly toward the ditch line on the right side of the road, as if something down there was moving along with us. But the first morning Troy rode again, I knew something was off before he even sat down. He stopped at the top step and looked down the aisle like he had never seen the bus before. Not nervous, not traumatized exactly, curious. I asked how he was doing. He did not answer at first, then said, "This one's longer." I thought he meant the route. She was not wrong. Then his dog tore open his forearm. That mattered because Troy had always talked about that dog, black lab named Sully, old and stupid, and friendly enough to wander onto porches and steal gloves. After school one afternoon, Troy got off the bus, stepped toward the yard, and Sully came off the chain, snarling so violently, Troy had to throw up his backpack like a shield. His mother dragged the dog back by the collar. 3 younger kids on my bus started screaming. Troy never even flinched. He stood there watching the dog the way you would watch a machine malfunction. The next morning, he boarded with the arm bandaged and mud still dried around his sneaker soles. I asked if he was okay. He said, "He knows I wasn't first." That was the sentence that made me call Earl from the bus lot that afternoon instead of going home. 3 mornings later, I picked Troy up in heavy fog. He was alone at the stop. His mother usually waited on the porch. That time the house looked dark. When he climbed aboard, He was carrying his old gym duffel. I told him he did not have practice that day. He said, "I know." Then he went straight to the back, past his usual seat, and sat by the emergency door. That by itself violated district rules for younger students, though 8th graders bent them all the time. I almost corrected him. Something in the set of his shoulders made me leave it. Halfway to school, I looked in the mirror and saw him pressing his forehead lightly against the glass of the rear door. Not crying, not sleeping, listening. When we turned near the bog road, he smiled. I dropped the run, parked in the school loop, and went back to make him get off. His seat was wet. Not rain wet, mud wet. Dark water with grit in it, as if his clothes had been soaked through, from below the knees up. There was also a smell, rank and mineral, like ditch water that has been standing under concrete all winter. He stepped off the bus before I could say much, and looked back at me with a calm expression I still think about. Something was still under there, he said. It wanted the ride home. That afternoon, state police came to the school. Not for him, for his body. A road crew clearing a blocked drainage line at Bennett's Dip found remains wedged deep where the old culvert narrowed under the roadbed. Clothing matched. Dental records later confirmed it was Troy Bennett, and based on the condition of the body, he had been there since the night he disappeared, which meant the boy I had wrapped in a district blanket and watched ride my bus for nearly 3 weeks was not him. The night before the dental confirmation was released, that boy walked out of Troy's house sometime after midnight. His bedroom window was found open. No footprints in the yard. The blanket from the hospital gone. Sully the dog was found cowering under the porch and had to be carried out. I went to work the next morning anyway, because there were children waiting at the end of roads, and I had learned by then that horror does not exempt you from routine. When I checked the rear seat before starting the engine, Troy's duffel was there. Inside were 3 things. A waterlogged transfer slip from the old district, a child-sized yellow mitten, and a route card with my name typed across the top. Destination field blank. Case 4, Bus 14. What changed everything for me was not Brees. It was Earl. Turncoat Road was a dead connector west of my route area, near an abandoned one-room school site and an old family cemetery that had partially washed downhill during a flood in the late 80s. County crews rerouted the road after that. The actual cemetery stones were supposedly moved or reset, but in Maine, there are a lot of places where moved means the visible part changed. Foundations stay, cellar holes stay, names stay in the ground whether officials sign a form or not. Bus 14 had been on that route the year after the flood. Earl told me one driver quit mid-year and another transferred. A third, a woman named Janice Cole, refused to take the bus after a late activity run in November. She reported seeing a second bus waiting nose-to-nose with hers at the old cemetery pull-off. Lights off, same district paint scheme, same route placard, no driver in the seat. When she radioed it in, dispatch heard only open static. By the time a deputy arrived, there was nothing there except Janice vomiting in the ditch and 12 basketball players refusing to get back on board. Why did I never hear any of this? I asked. Earl gave me a look that made the answer obvious. Because people keep jobs by not saying the wrong thing out loud. A few days after he showed me the log, one of our regular buses failed inspection for a steering issue, and I got assigned the spare for my afternoon middle school run. Bus 14. I almost refused on the spot. The first half of the run was uneventful except for one thing. At mile marker 6 on the county road near the old Turncoat cutoff, 4 different kids lowered their heads at once as we passed. It was so synchronized I asked what they were doing. A girl in the front answered without looking up. My grandfather said not to look right there. None of the others laughed at her. I asked why. She said, because if you see the bus in the trees, it sees yours back. Then she put her head down again, until we were well past the marker. I finished the route, dropped the last middle schooler, and headed to the school to wait for band release, with just the 2 older siblings expected afterward. I could have asked for a swap then. I did not. Pride, maybe, or the stupid belief that if you push through enough uneasy moments without something happening, you earn the right to stop being afraid. The band kids climbed on at 5:47, brother and sister, both quiet, both more interested in homework than conversation. Dusk had gone to full dark by the time we got beyond town. Rain had started, light but steady. The wipers on bus 14 had that old squeal at the far end of each arc. When we approached the turncoat section, the radio gave a sharp burst of feedback that made all 3 of us wince. Then an old dispatch tone sounded. Not the current one. The older 2-note attention beep used before my time, the kind I had only heard on archived safety tapes. A voice came after it. Male. Calm. Bus 14. Hold for crossing traffic. I checked the road ahead instinctively. There was no traffic. Then around the bend, through the rain-smeared windshield, I saw another bus. It was facing us from the old cemetery pull-off, set back among the trees where no bus should have fit. Yellow body dull with age. No hazard lights, no strobes. But the route placard above the windshield glowed pale enough for me to read the number. 14. The sibling pair saw it too. I know they did because the girl whispered, "Don't stop." I was already braking, but only because the road narrowed there, and my body responded before my mind did. The other bus sat motionless, headlights off, just enough reflected light on its windshield to show there was nobody in the driver's seat. Then the door folded open. I hit the accelerator. Bus 14 groaned, found purchase, and carried us past the pull-off. As we drew even, I looked once, only once, through the open doorway of the other bus. The steps were wet and lined with children's shoes. Not feet in shoes, just shoes, paired, muddy, arranged like they had been taken off in a hurry and left where the children stood. We cleared the bend, and I kept driving until I reached pavement wide enough to pull over, near a plowed lot entrance. I called dispatch so hard I nearly broke the mic switch. Real dispatch answered immediately. My students were crying now, not loudly, but with that choked breath children get when they are trying not to make things worse for the adult in charge. I told dispatch what I had seen. The woman on duty went silent, then said a supervisor and deputy would meet me at the next safe turnout. They got there fast, too fast. Carl Breeze came with them. That was the part that settled something ugly in me. Superintendents do not usually leave dinner and beat deputies to a rural turnout because of an equipment complaint. He had either been waiting for a call like mine, or there was already a plan in place for what to do if it came. The deputy took my statement. Breeze took the 2 students aside separately and asked gentle, leading questions in that administrator voice. Could it have been an old truck? A maintenance trailer? Reflected light? Both kids said bus. Both said door open. Neither was asked to repeat that part once Breeze started writing. The next morning my report in the system had been altered, not deleted, softened. Possible visual misidentification in rain conditions. No confirming evidence upon follow-up inspection. Students upset by road conditions. Earl told me bus 14 was pulled from service that same day and sent for salvage. He was forced into early retirement before the month was out. Officially, it was his shoulder. He left the cracked fleet log in my mailbox at home, wrapped in a grocery bag to keep it dry. Tucked into the back cover was a carbon copy route sheet from 1989 for Turncoat Road. At the bottom, beneath the listed students, someone had typed an extra pickup by hand. No house number, no parent contact. Just, children already waiting. Do not pass twice. Case 5, the last count. I stayed another 2 years after bus 14. People ask why, and I never have one clean answer. Because work is habit, because fear, once it settles into routine, does not always look like something to run from. Because my daughter still needed braces. Because if you quit every job that showed you a corner of the world you could not explain, eventually you would have to quit the world itself. But I changed after that. I stopped taking spare buses without reading every maintenance note I could get. I refused pre-dawn detours unless dispatch verified on a second channel. I kept exact counts, exact mileage, exact timestamps. I made sure every child I picked up was one I knew, by face if not by name. If a stop looked wrong, I rolled past and radioed in from distance. And for a while, that seemed enough. Then came the early dismissal in April. Snowmelt was high that week. Not flood level everywhere, but enough culverts were backing up and side roads softening that the district called a weather release after lunch. Parents hate those days because schedules break and nobody is ready at the right time. Transportation hates them because afternoon light changes the whole character of roads you only know from morning dark or normal PM traffic. My route was among the last to leave because 2 roads had to be checked for bus weight first. By the time I started dropping kids, the rain had turned thin and cold, and the low spots along the shoulders were holding silver water. One by one, I emptied out. By 3:14, I had 1 student left, Nora Bell, 4th grade, smart, quiet, lived on the far end past a washed cornfield and an old abandoned farmhouse, everyone simply called the Gray Place. She sat in the first bench on the right and read paperbacks during rides. That day she kept glancing over her shoulder. I asked if she was okay. She said, "Someone keeps saying names." I told her the radio was acting up. That was not true. The radio had been silent. About half a mile later, I heard it too. Not through the speaker. From the back of the bus. Faint, child's voice. Then another. Not loud enough to make out sentences. Only the shape of roll call. The cadence of attendance the way teachers read it. Short pause after each surname. I pulled over immediately. "Nora, stay seated," I said. I walked the aisle front to back. Empty. Every seat empty. No open windows, no loose panel rattling. Nothing hidden under the benches, except a dropped mitten and a pencil. Yet as I stood at the rear door, I heard it again, clearer this time. Olivia. Then a pause. Troy. Then a pause longer than the others, like whoever was reading had to look farther down the page. Daniel. The air changed in the bus after that, heavier, not colder exactly, pressed, like the moments before a thunderstorm when your ears feel wrong. I got back behind the wheel and made the decision I still hate myself for, and still cannot say was wrong. I did not call for immediate help, because I had a real child on board, on a soft rural road in rain, with daylight fading faster than it should have for April under that cloud cover. If I sat there waiting, I risked the shoulder giving way. If I reversed blind, I risked sliding a loaded bus into standing water. The safest move for Nora was forward, to her stop, then straight to a main road. So I drove. At 3:19, the radio keyed itself. No tone, no static buildup, just an open mic and breathing. Then my own voice said, clear as if I had pre-recorded it, "How many on board?" Nora started crying quietly in the front seat. I did not answer. The voice repeated, "How many on board?" This time it came from overhead and from the rear at once, as if the bus itself had learned speech in 2 different places and was trying both. I looked in the crossing mirror above the windshield. There were children seated behind Nora, maybe 6, maybe 8, enough that the aisle looked broken into yellow-brown segments by shoulders and heads. I turned around so fast my seatbelt locked. The bus was empty. When I faced forward again, the windshield had fogged from the inside, except for clean arcs where the wipers swept outside rain. That should not be possible. Heat and bodies fog interior glass, yes, but this came all at once, blooming from the side windows inward, until the world beyond the bus looked underwater. Then the route sheet slid off the dash onto the floor. It had not been loose. I picked it up one-handed at the next straight section and saw an extra line typed at the bottom in the same blocky transport office font as the rest. Mercer, Leah drop, Gray Place turnaround. My daughter had graduated 2 years earlier. I nearly put the bus in the ditch right there. Nora saw the sheet and asked, in a tiny voice, "Is Leah the one tapping?" That was when the first knock came from the rear. Then a second. Then a whole run of them from different windows, different heights, moving forward, like something pacing the bus from outside and trying every pane as it came. I radioed dispatch and got only that wet static I remembered from church turnoff. The Gray Place turnaround was still ahead. I could have skipped it. I should have skipped it. But the road beyond narrowed to a point where reversing would have been nearly impossible if the shoulder collapsed, and Nora's house lay past it on a branch lane that needed the turnaround to approach safely. So I kept going, and promised myself I would not stop for anything not on my route. The farmhouse came into view first, half-collapsed porch, fields gone to reed grass and alder. Then the turnaround opened to the right, a muddy oval cut years ago by town crews where the old driveway widened out. There was a child standing in the middle of it, yellow mitten in one hand, head down, not moving in the rain. Nora said, "That's not a little girl." She was right. From the driver's seat, with distance and coat and weather, the shape read child at first because of height, but as my bus approached, I saw the proportions were wrong. Arms too long, coat hanging oddly, like it had been put over something narrow and uneven. The head tilted not in curiosity, but in listening. I did not stop. I eased wide around the edge of the turnaround instead, tires slipping in the mud, and lined up for Nora's lane. The figure raised its face. I cannot tell you what I saw there because I never got a full human read on it. Not blankness, not damage, just the sense that features existed where features should be, but not arranged with any concern for being recognized quickly from a moving bus. Nora screamed then, sudden and sharp. I looked in the mirror. Every seat behind her was occupied. Wet children, some small, some older, some in modern coats, some in dark wool. One boy with a blanket around his shoulders. One girl holding a metal lunch pail on her knees. None speaking. All facing forward. And in the back seat, by the emergency door, sat Leah, at age 6, in the purple winter coat she wore the year I started driving. I knew it was not her. I knew that absolutely. It still hit me like a blade under the ribs. The thing in the turnaround started walking toward the road. Nora was still screaming. I made the only choice that mattered anymore. I drove straight to her house, half over the lawn because the lane was soft, and laid on the horn until her father came out. I opened the door before the bus was fully set. He reached for Nora. She jumped to him and nearly dragged him down the steps with the force of it. He shouted something about what was wrong, but I did not answer. I shut the door and pulled away before he got a second question out. That left me alone, completely alone, except I was not. The bus dropped low in the rear, enough to change the steering feel. There are things a driver knows through the chassis before thought catches up. Load shift, suspension weight, brake pull. I had passengers behind me whether the mirrors showed them or not. The radio keyed again. My own voice, calm and patient. "Final count, Daniel." Then, from the back in a child's voice I knew as surely as my own daughter's breathing, "You did not count us." I do not remember deciding to head for the main road. I just did it. Mud throwing off the rear tires, wipers smearing rain, engine louder than I had ever heard it. The knocks came faster, not random anymore, but synchronized to the turn signal clicking, though I was not using it. Every time I checked the mirror, the seats appeared empty for a second, then occupied again, in the next bounce of light. At one point I saw Olivia Thibodeau standing in the aisle, not walking, just there between rows, one mitten on, water dripping from the sleeve of the other arm. When I hit pavement, the bus lurched as if something large had stepped off the back. The rear emergency alarm started screaming. I pulled onto the shoulder, set the brake, grabbed the flashlight, and ran to the door. It was shut. It latched. Alarm light red. When I opened it, rain blew in, and there were small muddy footprints on the bottom step leading out to the wet asphalt. Dozens of them. Not away from the bus. Toward it. As if the road itself had been full of children trying to board. I made it back to the yard somehow. I do not remember much of that drive, except the certainty that if I answered the radio again in my own voice, I would never get the bus inside the gate. Dispatch later claimed they never reached me after 3:16. The bus I drove that day had cameras, forward-facing, driver-facing, interior aisle. That is the part people always want to hear, because they think cameras settle things. They do not. The footage from 3:14 to 3:31 was mostly intact. It showed me driving alone with Nora in the front seat until her drop-off, then driving alone afterward. No visible extra passengers, no figure in the gray place turnaround, no fogging except ordinary rain haze. But three things on that footage have never left me. First, Nora can be seen turning repeatedly to look at the empty seats and crying before anything visible happens. Second, at 3:22, every unoccupied seat on the right side depresses at once, by maybe 2 inches, holds for 4 full seconds, then rises together. Third, the audio track contains a stretch of low voices under engine noise that the district tech wrote off as interference. When I got a copy later and boosted it with headphones on in my kitchen, I heard names being read. Not random names. Every missing or dead student connected to my route, notes over those years, as far as I could identify them. The last name on the recording is Mercer, not Leah, mine. I resigned at the end of that school year. Officially, I cited stress and a better job offer, which was partly true. Unofficially, I could no longer tell the difference between vigilance and invitation. I had spent years believing that if I was careful enough, exact enough, responsible enough, I could keep whatever rode those roads from crossing fully into my life. Maybe responsibility was the very thing it used. That is what still bothers me now. Not the idea of ghosts, if that is what people want to call them. Not even the idea that some roads keep the imprint of the children lost on them. Rural places are full of memory. Flooded crossings, hidden graves, bad winters, buses that used to run where no bus should run now. I can accept that the land might not release people cleanly. What bothers me is the structure of it, the way it behaved like procedure, like boarding, like attendance, like a route that had to be completed correctly. Years after I left, I ran into a younger driver at a hardware store in Macias. He did not know me well, just knew I had used to drive. We talked weather, tires, school budgets. Then he laughed and said the routing software still kicked out junk entries every August from old archived addresses, dead roads, demolished houses, kids long graduated. He said dispatch usually scrubbed them before final print, but every now and then one slipped through onto a draft sheet and gave the office girls a scare. He told me the strangest one he had seen was a stop with no house number, no guardian, no emergency contact, just a note in the margin that did not match any modern formatting. Children already waiting. I did not tell him I had seen that line before. I did not tell him there are drivers who know to keep their doors shut when a stop appears where no stop should be. I did not tell him to count the kids, count the stops, count the miles, and not argue with himself if one of those changes, and he did not make it change. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But the truth is, warnings only help if the road is asking for a mistake. I do not think it is. I think there are stretches of those back roads that still believe children are supposed to be collected there. I think there are old routes that never finished. I think every missing name, every washed-out driveway, every bus that should have made it home and did not, left some part of the system open. And every fall, when the district prints new route sheets and the first buses begin moving before daylight, something out in those woods starts taking attendance again. There is one more reason I know it has not stopped. A year after I quit, I took a delivery job that sometimes put me on the road before sunrise. Different vehicle, different route, no children in the mirrors, but still the same county, the same wet shoulders, the same stretches where the woods stand too close to the pavement and seem to absorb sound instead of throwing it back. September had just started. School was in again. You could tell by the fresh paint on the bus hoods and the way the roadside grass was still green, where the first kids of the year had trampled paths to their stops. I was on Route 193, a little after 6, when I came up behind a district bus, pulled over with its reds flashing. There was no house there, no driveway either, not anymore, just a torn patch of gravel sinking into alder and a mailbox post cut off near the ground, like someone had removed it years back and never bothered digging out the rest. I knew the place because it was near an old turnout I used to pass on my Cherryfield run. The district bus was idling, door still shut, and the driver was sitting very still with both hands on the wheel. I remember thinking at first that maybe a child was late coming out of the trees. Then the door opened. No one got on. The bus rocked once anyway. Not from wind, not from the road crown, from weight. The driver closed the door, killed the reds, and pulled away without looking left or right. When the bus passed me in the other lane a little later at the school light, I got a clear look at the woman behind the wheel. I knew her. She had started the year after I left, young but steady, exactly the kind of driver the district liked, because she did not waste motion. She saw me. I know she saw me, and for 1 second, just one, she lifted her hand off the wheel and held up 4 fingers against the glass. Not a wave, a number, a count. Then she drove on. I have thought about that moment more than I should. Maybe she was signaling something ordinary. Maybe 4 kids had just boarded, and I gave it meaning, because once you have lived with a pattern long enough, you start seeing the pattern first and the world second. But I do not think that is what it was. I think she was telling me she had seen them too. Maybe that is the best you can do in a job like that. Not solve it, not name it, just recognize when the route is trying to collect more children than the county still has. So if you ever hear someone say driving a school bus is simple, that it is just a steady job for steady people on familiar roads, remember this instead. Some roads stay on the map after the families leave. Some stops stay in the system after the houses are gone. And every fall, before daylight, something out in those woods starts taking attendance again.